Hey folks, tonight we drift back into the murky, dreamlike edges of memory, where ocean currents whisper of empires, swallowed whole, and secrets that shimmer beneath the waves. Imagine a city of ringed circular islands, each surrounded by gleaming canals, all built with perfect symmetry and pulsing with a power we can barely understand. Flickering torches line aqueducts of red, black, and white stone. Somewhere, a brass trident hums in silence, and yet, all we have are hints. As you listen, post your location and local time in the comments. Let's see who else is stargazing with us around the world tonight. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the winding trails of ancient philosophy, one name echoes through time: Plato. He wasn't merely the father of Western thought, sipping hemlock and penning dialogues. He was, in many ways, a custodian of whispers tales passed from priest to pupil, cloaked in metaphor, and occasionally ... maps. It's in his works Timaeus and Critias that we get the only direct account of Atlantis. Most dismiss it as allegory, a political fable. But if you lean in close past the talk of virtue and ideal states, you'll hear something stranger. Plato speaks of Atlantis with uncanny detail. Ringed cities, precise measurements, resource flows, even agricultural data. And for a story supposedly made up, it has the chilling specificity of a civil engineer's report. Now, consider how Plato opens this tale. He attributes it not to his imagination, but to Solon, the great Athenian lawmaker. Solon, in turn, heard it from Egyptian priests during his travels in the 6th century BCE. These weren't your everyday story-swapping mystics. They were archivists, keepers of histories etched in stone, far older than Greece itself. They told Solon of a powerful island empire, swallowed by the sea 9,000 years before his time, that once tried to dominate the known world. Let's pause a second. That's 11,600 years ago from our present. That's not Greek history. That's the end of the last ice age. Now, why would Plato, a philosopher so obsessed with rationality, risk ridicule by embedding this ancient tale into his most serious works? And why would he include dimensions? The central island was said to be 5 stades across. The outermost ring, 27 stades in diameter. The canals, uniformly spaced and interconnected. We're talking about precise scaling, hydrological systems, and advanced urban design, all nestled inside a so-called myth. And here's the rub. These aren't just throwaway descriptions. The way the city is laid out, concentric circles separated by water, connected by bridges and tunnels, suggests a kind of functional harmony. Defensive, ceremonial, and infrastructural needs all being met at once. This isn't just pretty storytelling. It's a blueprint. So now the question becomes, what was Plato trying to preserve? Was he cloaking old knowledge in metaphor, hoping the right minds would one day decode it? Some scholars believe the very format of his dialogues, question and answer, push and pull, was a mechanism to protect dangerous knowledge. If that's the case, Atlantis wasn't just a cautionary tale. It was a veiled message. And while many readers over the centuries have dismissed the account as fiction, a select few have not. In fact, some believe that Plato's cryptic references serve a dual purpose. They mask the reality of an advanced lost civilization, while also acting as a trailhead for the initiated. Like a puzzle whose solution lies not in believing the story at face value, but in seeing through it. Let's peek at a tiny detail that often goes unnoticed. The name of Atlantis' capital city. Plato never gives it. He only describes it. That's odd, isn't it? He names kings, even plants. But the city itself? Nameless. As if it was never meant to be spoken aloud. Or maybe, just maybe, the name wasn't important. Maybe the structure was the message. The rings, the dimensions, the canals. Some have even speculated that Plato embedded ratios like the golden mean into his description. If that's true, he may have been encoding an architectural philosophy that predates classical civilization by millennia. Another strange inclusion? The description of the surrounding landscape. Mountains to the north, vast plains to the south, and a region teeming with elephants. That doesn't sound like anywhere near Greece, or even the Mediterranean. Some say it resembles parts of South America. Others point to Northwest Africa. The more you analyze Plato's text, the more it seems like someone trying to translate ancient cartography into the language of his time. And that's where the trail starts getting foggy and fascinating. Because, as we'll see in the next chapter, this wasn't the only time faint echoes of such a city plan appeared in ancient records. Egyptian wall inscriptions, Cretan palace layouts, and even South American petroglyphs all seem to murmur the same design principles, a geometry lost to us, but never entirely erased. Oh, and remember that joke about the city being powered by brass tridents. Funny thing, Plato also talks about orichalcum, a mysterious metal that glowed like fire and lined the inner walls of the central temples. Sound mythical? Possibly. But modern science has recently discovered alloys that emit faint light when charged with certain frequencies. Coincidence? Maybe. But then again, Atlantis always liked to play coy. If you tilt your head just right and squint at the past, history starts to blur into myth, and myth begins to behave like memory. That's the slippery edge we walk tonight, as we follow a trail of faded parchment and chipped stone, seeking echoes of Atlantis not in fantasy, but in forgotten records that once passed for fact. Let's begin in Egypt specifically, the Temple of Neith in the city of Sais. According to Plato, this was where Solon, the Athenian lawgiver, met with Egyptian priests who preserved the tale of Atlantis. And here's where things get interesting. Solon didn't just receive a bedtime story from his hosts. He was handed a narrative so ancient, so detailed, and so structurally sound that it couldn't have been made up on the spot. Egyptian civilization prided itself on preserving knowledge through dynasties, disasters, and droughts. They recorded everything from the precession of stars to the weight of grain taxes. So when the priests told Solon about Atlantis, they weren't telling a tale from last Tuesday. They were reading from records stored deep in the temple's vaults, stone walls, carved tablets, possibly papyrus scrolls long since turned to dust. And one small but crucial detail? The Egyptians claimed the story wasn't theirs either. They had received it from even earlier time civilizations, before the Nile had settled its course, when God still walked among men, and the great island rose powerful in the west. Now you might think, surely we'd have found these records. But here's the twist. We may have. We just didn't know what we were looking at. Throughout the Mediterranean world, archaeologists have uncovered fragmented diagrams, symbols, and architectural sketches that don't quite match any known temple or city layout. In Crete, the ruins of the Minoan palace at Knossos reveal a curious, maze-like arrangement, central courtyards surrounded by concentric corridors. Sound familiar? The Minoans, by the way, had a robust maritime empire, just like Atlantis. They traded across the Aegean, used advanced plumbing, and worshipped a bull-headed deity. So when Plato mentions Atlanteans performing rituals in bull rings and decorating temples with images of the bull, you start to wonder, was this entirely fiction? Or was he compressing memories of ancient Aegean powers into one symbolic civilization? Even stranger are the old Babylonian tablets unearthed in Mesopotamia. Some depict circular layouts of cities, complete with radial roads and defensive moats. One tablet in particular, known as the Map of the World, shows a city at the center of concentric rivers, with strange annotations about lands beyond the ocean. Scholars usually interpret it symbolically, but in light of Plato's account, it raises eyebrows. Let's take a detour briefly to South America. Centuries before European contact, the Inca and pre-Inca peoples had legends of a golden city hidden beneath the earth or in the heart of a jungle. One name often whispered, Paititi, supposedly circular technologically advanced, and built by a race who came from across the sea. Of course, this could be coincidence. Or it could be memory, stretched and reshaped by time. Some ancient Mayan codices, those that survived the Spanish torch, also contain glyphs, showing tiered cityscapes ringed by canals and adorned with skyward spires. Again, could be metaphor, could also be déjà vu. Here's the theory that tickles the back of the neck. What if Plato's Atlantis wasn't a one-off location, but a shared blueprint passed down through generations and civilizations? A sacred geometry encoded in legend, repeated in city planning, passed through the DNA of human memory. And remember, Solon reportedly began translating the Egyptian story into Greek poetry when he returned to Athens, but he died before finishing it. His descendant, Dropids, handed it down to Critias, Plato's great-grandfather. By the time Plato inherited the tale, it had already passed through 4 generations, just enough time to blur details, mix metaphors, and yet preserve the skeleton of the city. But here's the kicker. Plato didn't just include it in his writings as a curiosity. He embedded it within Timaeus, a dialogue about the creation of the universe and the order of things. He placed Atlantis within a philosophical framework about cosmic design. That's not casual. That's deliberate. Imagine if your great-grandfather gave you the plans to a city shaped in the image of divine logic, complete with transport systems, ceremonial centers, and power structures that mirrored planetary orbits, and you were told to keep it secret, but not hidden. Plato may have done exactly that. Let's talk quickly about a lesser-known gem, the writings of Diodorus Siculus, a Greek historian from the 1st century BCE. He described a distant western island, rich in gold and fertile soil, that once housed a powerful people who sailed the oceans. His tone? Less poetic than Plato's, more report-like. And then there's Herodotus, the so-called father of history. He never mentions Atlantis directly, but he does include a map in one account showing lands west of the Pillars of Heracles, a region most thought empty. What's west of the Pillars, by the way? The Atlantic Ocean. Sound familiar? At some point, the pattern becomes hard to ignore. Overlapping stories, shared symbols, repeating geometries. And still, like a mirage, Atlantis slips between our fingers. One last thought before we surface. In 2011, archaeologists discovered satellite evidence of ringed structures beneath the marshes of southern Spain, near the Donana wetlands. The formations match Plato's city plan down to proportions. Were they the real thing? Maybe. Maybe not. The region has a long, stormy history of flooding, earthquakes, and coastal shifts. But if true, it would suggest something tantalizing, that the myth was never truly lost, just buried under layers of time, silt, and scholarly caution. Let's dive literally into where the earth cradles some of her best-kept secrets, beneath the waves. There, along continental shelves and sunken valleys, lie the bones of cities no longer marked on any map. We call them ruins. The ocean calls them silence. But some of these underwater anomalies, they speak in circles, quite literally, and those whispers echo back to the blueprints of Atlantis. Start with the strange stone formations off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas. In 1968, divers discovered what appeared to be a long, rectangular path, a kind of paved road resting beneath shallow waters. At first glance, it could be mistaken for natural beach rock, but the alignment, the spacing, the precision, it smells of intention. Known now as the Bimini Road, it stretches for nearly a kilometer and is composed of large, flat, polygonal limestone blocks, like the floor plan of something grand, now drowned. Some researchers claim the stones are simply fractured natural formations. Others, well, they believe the road once led into the heart of an Atlantean district, its edges just touching the surface of memory and tide. The Bahamas, by the way, rest atop the submerged Bahama Bank, a massive plateau that, during the last ice age, would have stood proudly above sea level. If Atlantis truly existed during the time Plato suggested, around 11,600 years ago, that's exactly when sea levels were rising rapidly. Whole coastlines were retreating. Cities, if there were any, would have been swallowed. And yet, Bimini is only the beginning. Head east. Off the coast of southern Spain, near the Strait of Gibraltar, anciently known as the Pillars of Heracles, another site has drawn curious eyes: the Donana National Park wetlands. A strange place for a city, right? Not if you rewind the clock. Aerial and satellite imaging has revealed circular and rectangular impressions hidden beneath layers of mud and sediment geometry, peeking out like ghosts. Scientists used magnetometry and ground-penetrating radar to explore the patterns. What emerged? Ring structures. Concentric designs, right where Plato said Atlantis once sat. Now, is it definitive? No, but it aligns suspiciously well with his original dimensions. Central islands, circular harbors, and wide canals. And that's just the Atlantic. Let's plunge into the Mediterranean. Near the Greek island of Santorini, ancient Thera, there exists a volcanic caldera, once home to one of the most advanced Bronze Age civilizations, the Minoans. Around 1600 BCE, a cataclysmic eruption decimated the region. Some believe this eruption became part of the Atlantis mythos. But it's not just the disaster that's intriguing, it's what they left behind. Santorini's ancient city of Akrotiri, preserved in ash like a prehistoric Pompeii, offers glimpses of multi-story buildings, paved roads, and advanced drainage systems, all eerily ahead of their time. And here's the kicker: Akrotiri had art, wall paintings, not just of dolphins and birds, but of ships, of harbors, of organized fleets moving in unison. The city layout, too, contains hints of concentric logic, curved roadways, and planned zoning. But the most goosebump-worthy find? A fresco depicting a sprawling city that seems to rise in tiers, ringed by waterways and towers, with a glowing central temple. If you squint, it might as well be a storyboard of Plato's tale. Let's not forget Pavlopetri. This submerged city off the coast of southern Laconia, Greece, is one of the oldest known underwater urban settlements. It dates back to around 2800 BCE, with streets, buildings, courtyards, and even drainage canals. It shows that complex city building and coastal vulnerability was well understood millennia ago. Could Pavlopetri have been modeled on a far older city, remembered only through oral tradition? A once great prototype? Across the globe, in India's Gulf of Kumhat, sonar scans in the early 2000s revealed massive geometric structures submerged 40 meters beneath the surface structures with straight walls, right angles, and grid-like arrangements stretching over miles. Pottery shards and carbon-dated artifacts from the site suggest a human presence going back 9,500 years. Again, right in that mysterious post-Ice Age window. So what are we to make of all this? Coincidence? A worldwide case of ancient people deciding, simultaneously, that concentric cities and canal grids were the hot trend of the millennium? Or is it legacy? Could there have been a mother civilization, a technological and philosophical origin point that passed down its knowledge before succumbing to floods, quakes, or its own hubris? Plato mentions that Atlantis fell not just because of natural disasters, but due to moral collapse. Its people grew greedy, arrogant, disconnected from the divine geometry of their once perfect world. Nature simply pressed reset. Maybe that's why these underwater cities remain so quiet. They're not just ruins. They're warnings. And yet, not all signs beneath the sea are tragic. In Japan's Yonaguni Monument, off the coast of Okinawa, there lies a submerged stone complex that many believe to be man-made. Terraces, stairs, right-angled corridors, all carved into solid rock. It looks like a fortress, or perhaps a temple. Opponents argue that the formations are natural, but a few divers have reported engravings and even symbolic carvings on the walls long eroded but not erased. If Yanaguni is artificial, it would date back over 10,000 years. That predates the pyramids, predates Stonehenge, predates writing, and yet it shares one strange commonality with all the sites we've explored: intentional geometry. You see the pattern forming, don't you? Time and tide may bury cities, but form true, form survives. Geometry doesn't lie. It repeats. It reemerges, again and again, like a signal beacon pulsing through the oceans of time. Maybe Atlantis wasn't just a place. Maybe it was a design philosophy. A way of building not just with stone, but with meaning. Concentric harmony. Balance between man, nature, and the cosmos. And perhaps, every time one of these ringed cities is revealed beneath the sea, it isn't a lost world being rediscovered. It's Atlantis, knocking gently on the glass between past and present, reminding us it was always there, just waiting for us to look. Imagine walking through a forest of stone temples, rising like frozen waves, each etched with symbols no one fully understands. Now look closer. Some of these carvings don't seem to be random at all. They line up. They form patterns. They look like maps. Tonight, we explore these strange symbolic engravings, faint, weather-worn, and often ignored. But when viewed with fresh eyes, they start to resemble pieces of an ancient puzzle, blueprints, perhaps, to a city long buried by myth. Take Egypt again, for instance. The Temple of Edfu, far from the tourist-laden pyramids, houses an inscription known as the Edfu building texts. Carved deeply into sandstone walls, this long narrative speaks of the primordial mound, a sacred island that existed in the earliest times. It describes a city destroyed by flood and fire, inhabited by divine beings with sophisticated knowledge of architecture, astronomy, and sacred geometry. It even goes further, describing how survivors of this cataclysm journeyed outward, carrying plans to build patterned places modeled after the original lost city. The exact wording is hauntingly familiar, though it never uses the word Atlantis, the idea of a destroyed central civilization that seeded knowledge across the ancient world echoes through every line. Now fast forward to the temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia. On the surface, it's a marvel of Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. But dive beneath the art, and you'll find a city designed in celestial alignment. The layout of Angkor mirrors the stars of the Draco constellation. But there's something else. At its center are tiered structures surrounded by moat-like water systems, not just for defense or ritual, but perhaps mimicry of a deeper tradition. Concentric placement, water channels, a central temple. It's architectural déjà vu. Speaking of déjà vu, let's travel to South America. High in the Andes, the mysterious carvings at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku boggle the mind. Blocks of stone weighing tens of tons, fitted with such precision that a razor blade couldn't slip between them. Decorative motifs include stair-step shapes, labyrinthine engravings, and once again symbols that suggest flow. Flow of what? Water? Energy? People? There's a curious glyph repeated at several sites across Tiwanaku, interlocking circles. Some archaeologists call it artistic flourish. But when the pattern is laid over certain circular city designs, including Plato's Atlantis, it matches far too neatly. At Pumapunku, some of the stone blocks include groove marks that may have been used to hold copper piping. Combine that with the repeating circles, and you start wondering, were these spiritual symbols or civil engineering diagrams cleverly disguised? Let's talk about spirals for a moment. They're everywhere in ancient symbolism. From Irish megaliths to Native American petroglyphs, spirals repeat sometimes singly, sometimes in double helix patterns, and sometimes arranged concentrically. Some scholars believe the spiral is simply the symbol of the sun or of the cosmos. but in context engraved on stone panels, beside signs of water movement or city layouts. They may signify circulation, flow, city design, hidden instruction. In Malta, the Cal Cefaleni hypogeum is an underground complex that's been dated to over 5,000 years ago. In its deepest chamber, there's a carved recess known as the Oracle Room. Here, the acoustics are so precise that chanting in certain frequencies causes the entire chamber to vibrate. The walls are decorated with red ochre spirals. Is it a tomb? A sound chamber? Or a memory capsule, a blueprint, not in diagrams, but in frequencies? Across the ocean, in the American Southwest, ancient Anasazi and Hopi petroglyphs include maps of cities with clear directional axes. Some show circular town centers with radial lines stretching outward like spokes on a wheel. Others show a layout of 4 quarters, each representing an elemental balance: earth, wind, fire, and water. In Hopi lore, these cities were designed according to plans received from people of the sky or from older worlds. Echoes again. But perhaps one of the most compelling examples lies in the Indian subcontinent. In the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, one of the oldest planned cities in the world, archaeologists have discovered precise grid systems, elevated platforms, and uniform water reservoirs. But on several carved seals, found in what may have been administrative centers, are bizarre motifs, ringed shapes surrounding a central figure, perhaps a deity or a symbolic representation of the city's layout? Now here's where things get weirder. These symbols, when analyzed by pattern recognition AI in recent years, have shown similarities to early computer chip designs. That doesn't mean ancient people had computers, but it suggests they intuitively grasped complex systems, circuits, and energy flow. And when you apply the same logic to the Atlantean rings, it starts to resemble a living circuit board. Power generation, distribution, containment. Form following function. In Sardinia, Italy, there are over 7,000 ancient structures called Nurag's megalithic towers, shaped like beehives, surrounded by circular settlements. Though their original purpose is unclear, they are often arranged in star-like patterns when mapped from above. Some believe they were built as star temples. Others suspect the layout was based on an older memory, perhaps a remembered homeland lost beneath the sea. Let's not forget the Nazca lines in Peru, giant geoglyphs that span miles. While the animal shapes are most famous, there are also massive spirals and grid-like rectangles. Some researchers believe the shapes aren't merely art, but schematics, possibly aerial instructions to map terrain, or even signal something from the sky. Throughout all these sites, one recurring theme emerges. Form as function, symbol as code. The symbols weren't just spiritual fluff. They were data compressed into stone, awaiting someone who could read them. And when read side by side, across continents and cultures, the message grows clearer. These weren't isolated expressions of sacred geometry. They were part of a worldwide memory, a shared blueprint. Atlantis, not as a city on a map, but as a concept etched into stone across the globe. One last thought to carry you gently into the night. Perhaps the city itself never truly vanished. Perhaps it was always hidden in plain sight, fragmented like stardust across temples and tombs. Perhaps Atlantis isn't a place to be discovered, but remembered. Let's turn our attention now to the bones of Atlantis, not its myths or murals, but its math. Because while legends can lie and symbols can be cryptic numbers tend to tell the truth, even when they're whispering across millennia. Tonight, we unfold the geometry of an empire, a city designed not just with beauty in mind, but with mathematics as its very heartbeat. Plato didn't just say, Atlantis had concentric rings. He told us exactly how wide they were. The central island was 5 stades across. That's roughly 0.92 kilometers. The surrounding water ring? 1 stade wide. Then came a land ring, 2 stades wide. Water again, land again, like an ancient ripple frozen in stone. Now, at first glance, these numbers might seem arbitrary, but when you chart them, a strange order emerges. The rings aren't random. They follow proportional logic growing outward in near-perfect Fibonacci sequence. Not precisely the modern series of 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, but close enough to raise a brow. Nature loves Fibonacci. It's in sunflower seeds, nautilus shells, galaxies. Why not Atlantis? Now pause. Ask yourself, why would a fictional city, dreamed up by a philosopher, need architectural math so meticulous it could hold up under satellite modeling 2,400 years later? Let's go deeper. Many ancient city plans used sacred geometry. Think of the mandalas of India, the quadrants of Chinese feng shui, or the pyramid-perfect cardinal alignments of Giza. Plato himself was obsessed with geometry. In fact, it's said that above the entrance to his academy, a sign read, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter." So when he describes the layout of Atlantis, it's not scenery. It's philosophy in stone. He even discusses how the Atlanteans shaped their canals, cutting through each ring with bridges at key intervals. There were 5 zones of water and 5 of land. The bridges crossed at exact points, aligned with temples, gymnasiums, and royal halls. That's city planning advanced, even by today's standards. The idea wasn't just symmetry, it was flow. Urban designers today call this form optimization. Ancient Atlantis, it seems, already had it down. The placement of temples at the center? That's a nod to centrality theory. The radial roads stretching outward? That's a precursor to hub and spoke transit systems. The use of canals for both irrigation and defense? That's double-duty infrastructure, sustainable and strategic. And here's the twist. These aren't uniquely Atlantean ideas. Similar models can be found in ancient Mesopotamian cities, some Mayan ceremonial centers, and even the ruins of Teotihuacan in Mexico. Each follows a grid with surprising precision. Some even mirror astronomical alignments, building fronts placed to face solstices, roads laid along lunar cycles. One example worth noting, the ancient city of Petra, Jordan. Carved into rose-red cliffs, it's famous for its beauty, but its underlying geometry is stunning. The city's orientation aligns with the rising sun on the solstice. Temples are spaced at mathematically harmonic intervals. It's not just stunning, it's engineered elegance. Back to Atlantis. The use of stades, an old Greek measurement, is interesting in itself. It suggests Plato was attempting to convert older, possibly foreign units into something Greek readers would understand. Think of it as a historical Google Translate. If that's the case, the original measurements may have been even more complex, encoded in cubits, royal spans, or some long-lost unit system tied to Earth's geometry. Which brings us to one of the more curious rabbit holes, the Earth grid theory. It posits that ancient civilizations were aware of planetary energy lines, similar to ley lines, and built their cities and monuments at the intersections of these lines. While not mainstream science, it's oddly compelling. When researchers overlay certain ancient sites on a global grid, Giza, Easter Island, Machu Picchu, and yes, Bimini patterns emerge. Triangulations, alignments. Some even suggest the Atlantean capital sat dead center on one such junction. Is it proof? No, but it's deliciously suspicious. Let's spiral just a bit further. The golden ratio 1.618 is a number found in art, nature, and design. It's the shape of beauty itself. Leonardo da Vinci used it. Modern architects still do. In Plato's Atlantis, some scholars have found that when you convert his ring dimensions into ratios, golden harmonics appear. The width of each ring in relation to the others approaches phi. Coincidence? Or was the city itself a giant harmonic instrument designed to resonate with the Earth? It wouldn't be impossible. Acoustic engineers have suggested that cities with repeating geometries and curved canals could function like natural amplifiers. Imagine a city where music played at the central temple could echo softly through the entire metropolis. Sound as structure, sound as power. And speaking of power, Plato mentions a central holy temple of Poseidon and Clito, lined with orichalcum. This mysterious metal, glowing like fire, has puzzled readers for centuries. But some believe it was a copper-gold alloy, possibly used for its conductive properties. Which raises the question, was Atlantis wired? Could it be that the geometry of the city wasn't just aesthetic but energetic? That the rings, canals, and towers were part of a larger energy system? Some believe the Atlanteans may have harnessed geothermal or tidal energy through canal design and materials science far ahead of their time. That would explain the city's strange survival, not just built to last, but built to hum. As we pause here, think of Atlantis not as a myth, but as a pattern. A shape humanity returns to when it seeks balance, harmony, and beauty. Circular cities, central power, water and stone in dialogue, and beneath it all, the soft whisper of numbers that refuse to be forgotten. Now that we've traced the delicate geometry of Atlantis, let's walk deeper into its mystery, into the glint of something unnatural, something ... metallic. Tonight, we peel back the veil on one of Plato's strangest inclusions, the shimmering presence of orichalcum, a mysterious metal said to glow like fire. But this isn't just about shiny objects. It's about how the city may have been wired not metaphorically, but literally through a forgotten science that wove power into the very fabric of its streets. Let's begin with the word itself, orichalcum. Plato describes it as the second most valuable substance after gold. It lined walls, coated temples, and was mined from the island itself. In the inner sanctum of the temple to Poseidon, everything shimmered with it. The floors, the ceiling, the obelisks. It wasn't ornamental. It was everywhere, and it radiated. But what was it? Some ancient writers believe orichalcum was a legendary alloy, part copper, part something else, maybe zinc, maybe an alchemical element lost to time. Others thought it symbolic, a stand-in for divine light or spiritual wealth. That would be the tidy explanation. But in 2015, off the coast of Sicily, divers found ingots of reddish gold metal in a shipwreck. Lab analysis? A unique alloy of copper, zinc, and traces of nickel, lead, and iron. And the name on the cargo? Orichalcum. So it existed, or at least something close to it did. Now let's play with an idea. What if orichalcum wasn't just beautiful, but functional? Think of how modern cities are wired. Copper runs through our walls and underground in endless cables, carrying energy, signals, data. What if Atlantis did something similar, but with stone and metal in partnership? Remember those concentric rings of land and sea? The canals weren't just pretty moats. They moved water perhaps to turn turbines, or regulate temperature. And what if the bridges crossing those canals were conduits housing rods or cables of orichalcum beneath their stone skins, connecting the central temple to the rest of the city? Some theorists believe the city might have harnessed a natural form of energy, maybe geothermal, maybe hydrodynamic. There are even more fringe theories suggesting vibrational energy frequencies channeled through specific materials, using the geometry of the city as an amplifier. Sound familiar? The same idea crops up in ancient Indian texts, where Vimana's mythical flying machines were said to operate through vibration and mercury-based engines. Weird, yes. But is it stranger than a copper-zinc alloy that glows in firelight? Now pair that with the temples. Plato says they were enormous, 1 stadium long, 3 plethra wide, and completely covered in this strange metal. The central temple of Poseidon in Clito was flanked by a golden roof, silver walls, and interiors brimming with orichalcum. And at its heart, a massive statue of Poseidon riding a chariot drawn by 6 winged horses. Imagine the scene at sunset. The metal would catch the light and throw it across the city like lightning caught in stone. This wasn't just wealth, it was theater. A visual energy field, And if orichalcum had conductive properties, it may have had an unseen purpose as well, transmitting energy, perhaps resonating with the water currents flowing through the city's carefully channeled canals. Let's step even further into speculative territory. Could this be why Atlantis fell? If the city was built on a delicate energetic system one, relying on harmony between natural elements, sacred geometry, and material science, then a disruption in any one of these could throw the whole system out of balance. Plato says the downfall came after the Atlanteans turned away from their divine nature, growing corrupt and power-hungry. Maybe that's metaphor, or maybe it's a poetic way of saying they misused the very forces that sustained their world. Think of Chernobyl, not the myth, but the mechanism. A city built on energy that suddenly turned destructive when mismanaged. Could Atlantis have faced something similar? An energy overload? A system too sophisticated for its stewards? It's worth noting, almost every surviving account of Atlantis emphasizes not just its power, but its fall. And always, the theme is excess. The people turned their tools of creation into tools of control. Their cities, once pulsing with purpose, became bloated with ego. Here's another metallic twist. The Atlanteans were described as mining a wealth of metals from beneath the earth. Not just orichalcum, but silver, gold, tin. In a Bronze Age context, that's significant. Bronze itself requires tin and copper, and those two metals rarely occur together naturally. That means trade, technology, and a level of metallurgical knowledge far ahead of most known civilizations of that time. Now widen the lens. Ancient legends around the world speak of metals that heal, glow, sing. The Aztecs believed in Teoquitlatl, divine excrement, literally, but in practice, a mystical gold. The Vedic texts describe soma metal, used in rituals that blended sound, fire, and purification. These weren't just ornaments. They were thought to conduct power physical and spiritual. What if Atlantis's brilliance lay not only in how it looked, but in how it functioned? A city wired for light, sound, water, and spirit. A place where metal, stone, and mind formed a feedback loop of resonance. We may never hold a chunk of true orichalcum, but maybe we don't need to. Maybe what matters is the principle it represents, a unity of utility and beauty. Technology that hums in tune with the world around it, not against it. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's the real magic of Atlantis. Not lost technology, but lost intention. A civilization that once understood how to build with harmony, only to lose it to pride. As we move forward, remember, metal remembers. It oxidizes, it erodes, but it leaves behind traces. And somewhere, under layers of coral and silt, a forgotten circuit of orichalcum may still wait quiet, gleaming, and perfectly aligned. So far, we've walked the polished paths of ancient geometry and traced the glittering arteries of orichalcum through the heart of a forgotten empire. Now, let's step onto Atlantis's true lifeblood, its waterways. Because more than its temples, towers, or treasure, it was the water that shaped this city. It flowed through its streets, its systems, and maybe even its soul. Tonight, we follow the Atlantean waterways, irrigation canals, harbors, and sacred pools and ask, was this a city or a living, breathing organism? Plato is clear on one thing. Atlantis was a maritime power, not just powerful at sea, but a civilization of the sea. It was ringed in water, connected by water, and nourished by water. Its harbors were deep, its canals vast, and its heart, a central island, was reached only by ship or bridge. Let's break it down. The capital of Atlantis, according to Plato, was composed of 3 concentric rings of water, separated by 2 rings of land, with a central island in the middle. These rings weren't symbolic, they were measured. The central island was 5 stades across, the surrounding land and water rings proportionally larger. But here's where it gets fascinating. These weren't static moats. They were working channels. Atlantis's engineers had pierced the rings at specific points north, south, east, and west, with bridges that spanned the water and connected the whole system. These bridges weren't just for foot traffic. Underneath them were stone-lined tunnels wide enough to allow boats to pass through. Essentially, Atlantis was a looping aquatic roundabout city with no corners, where everything curved, flowed, and fed into something else. And at the city's edge, a vast canal 300 feet wide and 100 feet deep connected the rings to the sea. It wasn't a ditch. It was a grand artery, cut directly through the island's landmass, stretching for miles. That canal, Plato says, wound its way to the ocean like a carefully carved river. It was flanked by towers and watchposts. Trees lined its sides, and once ships entered, they didn't dock at just any pier. They were guided inward, ring by ring, through a sequence of harbors, until they reached the innermost port. Imagine sailing into that city. First, the outermost harbor, a bustling ring full of cargo ships, merchants shouting in dozens of languages. You'd pass through stone arches as the water narrowed, each gate more ornate than the last. Maybe the scent of sea salt mixed with cinnamon and citrus drifted on the breeze. And then, as you reached the innermost ring still on water, you'd behold the Temple of Poseidon, rising above all, reflecting off the ringed channels like a divine lighthouse. This wasn't just city planning. This was theater. Atlantis greeted every guest with a full performance. But the waterways weren't all spectacle. They were functional and brilliant. The system ensured continuous flow-moving water and silt in a way that prevented stagnation. It likely provided flood protection, fresh water storage, and possibly even a rudimentary method of tidal energy collection. Think of Venice meets ancient Egypt with a dash of genius. The canals doubled as transport routes. Ships carried goods not on roads, but through the city's liquid corridors. It's also worth noting how integrated the water was into daily life. Homes and public buildings were constructed on the ringed landmasses between canals. Plato says there were docks, shipyards, and warehouses built into the walls of these rings. The water wasn't something that people kept at bay. It was part of their rhythm. Wake up, paddle across to the market, maybe pass under a vine-covered bridge or past a statue half drowned in mist. Romantic? Maybe. But also ... efficient. Now here's where it gets even more intriguing. The use of water pressure. Some theorists suggest that the tiered ring system may have allowed for gravitational irrigation. Water from mountain springs could have been channeled downwards into upper terraces, and then down into the rings. Each ring would function as both reservoir and flow manager. There's even a possibility that Atlantis used a kind of hydroacoustic resonance system, primitive but effective way of using water movement to amplify sound, or even operate mechanical tools. And yes, it's speculative but not impossible. Take ancient Sri Lanka's Sigiriya complex. It used gravity-fed fountains and underground canals over 1,500 years ago. In Cambodia, Angkor Wat used similar water management with astonishing precision. Why not Atlantis, with its supposedly far older and even more advanced system? Plato also describes a grand canal that encircled the entire outer ring, an artificial river that may have served as both moat and aqueduct. Some believe it channeled spring water into reservoirs to prevent drought. Others think it may have carried warm water into homes, a form of rudimentary heating. That might sound fantastical, but ancient Rome had underfloor heating. The Minoans had hot and cold running water. If Atlantis was real, and truly older than all these cultures, it's not outrageous to think they mastered similar feats. Maybe even more. Let's not forget the symbolic power of water. For many ancient cultures, it represented life, purity, transition, and even cosmic birth. Atlantis, shaped in rings, with water separating each stage of the city, could be seen as a metaphor for spiritual progress. From the chaotic outer world, One traveled inward across water, through rings toward the temple, toward the divine, toward balance. And that might be Atlantis's greatest blueprint of all. Because even today, many cities fail where water is concerned. They flood, they dry out, they waste. But Atlantis, as described, was designed to work with water, to celebrate it, channel it, revere it. From the canals and fountains to the artificial lakes and sacred pools, it was a civilization in constant dialogue with the flow of nature. As we glide out of this section, picture this: the sun setting behind the outer mountains, the canals glowing with twilight, the sound of water lapping gently at carved stone, and far off, a temper bell ringing its tone, carried not through air, but along the soft current of the water. Atlantis wasn't just a city, it was a living tide. So far, we've drifted through Atlantis's water-veined streets, basked in the glow of its mystical metals, and marveled at its divine proportions. But tonight, we climb higher into the symbolic core of the city, the central temple of Poseidon and Clio. Because if Atlantis had a beating heart, this was it. Not just a religious monument, but a cosmic anchor, a structure where mythology, architecture, and power met in a choreography so precise, it might have been engineered for gods. Now, picture this. At the center of the innermost island, surrounded by 3 rings of water and 2 of land, stood a massive temple dedicated to Poseidon, the city's patron god, and Clio, his mortal lover. Plato describes it as a building of awe-inspiring dimensions, 600 feet long, 300 feet wide, and clad in metals that shimmered silver on the outside, orichalcum within, and gold ornamenting the details. That's the equivalent of 2 football fields in length. A temple? More like a celestial engine. But before we walk through its golden doors, let's rewind to how this place came to be. According to the tale, Poseidon fell in love with Clio, a mortal woman living on the island before it became Atlantis. To protect her, he surrounded her hilltop home with concentric rings of land and sea-5 in total, and made it impenetrable to strangers. The city was born of love, and its core was a tribute to that union. Myth or not, it hints at the origins of Atlantis being deeply personal, sacred, and quite literally built from the center out. Now step inside. The inner sanctum of the temple housed a colossal statue of Poseidon himself, driving a chariot drawn by 6 winged horses, his arm raised high in command. He was said to be made entirely of orichalcum, the mysterious glowing metal, and surrounded by a host of nereids, sea nymphs riding dolphins. The statue stood so tall, it brushed the ceiling beams, which themselves were gilded and engraved with stars. It wasn't just spectacle. It was theater with intent. Every detail reinforced Poseidon's dominion over sea, sky, and power. The winged horses? Perhaps symbolic of transcendence uniting land and air. The dolphins and nereids? Emblems of guidance and harmony. And Clio? Though she had no statue of her own, her presence was everywhere. The island was named for her. The sanctuary existed because of her. She was the still point in the spiraling design, the mortal heart within the divine machinery. And this temple, by the way, wasn't just a pretty face. It was an administrative center, a treasury, and a place of law. Each year, the 10 kings of Atlantis, descendants of Poseidon's 10 sons, would gather within the temple for an ancient ritual. Here, they would review the laws carved on golden tablets, offer sacrifices, and renew their oath to govern justly. They would wear robes dyed with the blood of bulls, pour libations, and burn offerings. Then they'd deliberate, not with threats, but with balance and reason. Imagine 10 rulers seated beneath a sky-painted ceiling, their reflections dancing on polished marble, their voices low and calm, beneath the ever-gazing eyes of their ancestor, carved in shimmering orichalcum. But there's something else, Plato tells us, something we often miss. Before any of these rulers could pass judgment, they would first hunt a bull with their bare hands. They would capture it, bring it to the temple, and sacrifice it in Poseidon's honor. A dramatic primal rite. Part humility, part endurance, part cosmic alignment. The kings, no matter how powerful, had to earn their seat, year after year. Not by conquest, but by right. And yet, beneath all this grandeur lies a pattern. The temple, like the city itself, was based on concentricity. Circular altars, tiered steps, symmetry in all dimensions. Why? Perhaps it was symbolic, representing unity, eternity, or the orbits of planets. But it also had an acoustic function. Circular spaces create natural reverberation. Sound travels differently. Whispers echo. Chants amplify. Some theorists suggest the temple may have been built not just for prayer, but for resonance. Perhaps even healing, or tuning. A tuning fork for the human spirit. And as with many sacred sites, water played a part even here. At the base of the central statue was said to be a spring, both hot and cold, bubbling from beneath the earth. Imagine a twin-source fountain, feeding ceremonial baths and irrigating the inner gardens. In fact, Plato notes that the area within the central island was lush and fertile, carefully cultivated. Fruit trees, flowering plants, and sacred groves surrounded the temple grounds. It wasn't just a political center, it was Edenic. Let's consider another perspective. What if the temple was more than a monument to Poseidon? What if it encoded astronomical knowledge? In many ancient cultures, temples served as calendars. The layout of their windows, the alignment of their corridors, even the materials used, all carried hidden messages. In Egypt, Karnak Temple's axis aligns with the midwinter sunrise. At Stonehenge, the solstice dances in stone. It's possible the temple at the heart of Atlantis followed the same logic. Perhaps the winged horses of Poseidon's chariot represented the constellations, or the golden roof mimicked the celestial dome. Some even speculate the statue wasn't static at all, that it turned, slowly, suspended from a rotating platform powered by underground water pressure, or by mechanical levers reset during rituals. That's a stretch, yes. But when we consider the complexity of ancient mechanisms, like the 2,000-year-old Antikythera device, a Greek analog computer for tracking planets suddenly, moving statues don't seem quite so mythical. The temple also functioned as a memory vault. Those golden tablets? They weren't symbolic. They contained the founding laws of Atlantis, passed from Poseidon to his sons, preserved through ritual. The city may have changed. Technologies may have evolved. But the temple? It stayed. A timeless keeper of principles. A lighthouse for the Atlantean soul. And finally, think of this. The last thing many would have seen as Atlantis began to fall, whether by quake, wave, or storm, was this glowing temple, rising above the chaos. Its golden roof catching lightning. Its statue tall and defiant. A beacon of order as the world crumbled. If Atlantis is real, its temple was more than stone. It was an encoded prayer etched in light, sound, and symmetry. A sanctuary for gods and men alike. Now that we've explored the glittering sanctum at Atlantis' heart, it's time to leave the ceremonial and enter the everyday. What did life look like for the average Atlantean? Did they sip nectar beside crystal canals? Or were they farmers, traders, artisans? In this section, we drift away from the thrones and temples into the hum of daily life, where markets buzzed, classrooms whispered, and the scent of saffron bread floated above stone ovens. First, let's remember the scale. Atlantis wasn't just one city. It was an empire, a confederation of 10 kingdoms, each ruled by a descendant of Poseidon. The capital island was just the glittering hub. Radiating outward were vast plains, forests, villages, and ports. It was a world in miniature, from highland terraces to bustling harbors, from sacred groves to workshops full of bronze and stone. And speaking of bronze, let's start with technology. Plato describes Atlantis as having sophisticated metallurgy. That means more than just shiny armor. The Atlanteans likely had tools for agriculture, carpentry, shipbuilding, and possibly even medicine. Imagine a blacksmith's quarter within one of the city's land rings, fire roaring, hammers clanging, sparks dancing like fireflies into the twilight. Tools were shaped here, not just for war, but for craft. You'd hear a different kind of music nearby, the laughter of children, echoing through courtyards. Plato mentions an abundance of children in Atlantis, and education was likely essential. Not rote memorization, but experiential learning. Maybe young Atlanteans were taught geometry by walking the rings. Maybe astronomy happened on rooftops, charting stars from stone observatories. With such emphasis on harmony and design, education probably reflected that fusing logic, beauty, and spirituality. Let's not forget the food. Atlantis, with its concentric canals and irrigation channels, was fertile beyond belief. Plato writes about abundance in all things, particularly fruits. Not just grapes and olives, but exotic varieties now extinct. There were citrus trees, berries, and stone fruits, all ripening in layered terraces. Farmers used oxen to till the deep, black soil, which Plato oddly specifies as deep and loamy. That little detail? It means something. It implies rich, volcanic ground perfect for agriculture. And while we're on food, imagine their marketplaces. The inner land rings of the capital, connected by bridges and water taxes, likely hosted daily markets. Vendors shouting in multiple dialects, spices perfuming the air, the rhythmic call of conch shell horns announcing fresh catches from the harbor. Fish grilled right there on the canal side. Shellfish traded for fruit. Copper coins clinking into hand-carved bowls. It wasn't just commerce, it was culture, curated daily. Textiles, too, would have thrived. Plato mentions fine fabrics and dyes. The Atlanteans likely wore linen and wool, but maybe they'd also perfected silk-like materials from seaweed or bark fibers. Their colors? Vivid, not just for status, but for balance. Blues, golds, and reds each resonating with the spiritual principles of the city. Clothing wasn't just fashion, it was a statement of harmony. Now, let's talk housing. Forget crumbling huts or uniform apartment blocks. Atlantean homes were designed with intention. Stone foundations, elevated platforms, central courtyards for air and light. They built upward, not just outward. Homes might have had second stories, balconies overlooking the canals, and solar alignment to track light through the seasons. Floors were likely mosaic tiny stones arranged in patterns reflecting nature, stars, or ancestral myths. Some say they used colored tiles made from volcanic glass or metal flakes. Others believe the homes were covered in plaster that glittered subtly in the morning light. Not grand mansions, but living artworks. Even the poor may have lived in beauty. But what about the workforce? This was no feudal peasant economy. Plato emphasizes equality, at least early on. Citizens were free, trades were respected, and governance was shared. Atlantis had a council, possibly an early form of parliament. Guilds may have existed. Stonemasons, herbalists, navigators. And yes, there were likely hierarchies, but not oppressive ones, at least until the city began to fall into decadence. And here's something easy to overlook: leisure. A city that rich in resources had time for play. There were public baths, gymnasiums, music schools. Plato even describes racecourses and stadiums. Sports may have been ritualized more than entertainment, a test of virtue and balance. Imagine canal races with slim boats, music echoing across the water, dances that mimicked the movements of the planets, theater troupes performing myth and history beneath open-air colonnades. And love? Romance? Who knows how the Atlanteans flirted? Maybe by exchanging carved shells or reciting star charts. Maybe love letters were etched into palm bark or sung across balconies. Maybe they believed in sacred unions relationships, aligned by elemental compatibility. water with fire, air with earth. And not everything was polished. Cities, no matter how advanced, have their shadows. There would have been disagreements, noise, the smell of fish too long in the sun, children throwing pebbles in the canal, a neighbor's parrot shrieking out the alphabet. At 2A, Emma isn't utopia. It was human. And that's what makes it beautiful. Because beneath the glowing towers and resonant temples, Atlantis pulsed with daily life. Men and women rising with the sun, boiling tea, sweeping courtyards, dogs barking, bells ringing, the clink of bronze cups and laughter drifting over water. 1,000 quiet joys. When people imagine Atlantis, they think of its fall, its fire, its waves. But its true magic was in the living, in a loaf of bread pulled from a clay oven, in a kiss beneath the canopy of flowering trees, in a child's laughter echoing through a spiral garden. That's the Atlantis we sometimes forget, the one that mattered most. Now, let's cast our eyes beyond the shining temples and bustling markets, out past the capital, where the sea meets the edge of the empire. Because Atlantis, as Plato told it, wasn't some lonely island kingdom. No, Atlantis was a superpower, a vast maritime civilization with colonies, trading posts, and political influence stretching from the Mediterranean to the edges of the known world. So tonight, we go abroad. We sail with Atlantean merchants. We bargain in foreign ports, and retrace the invisible threads that once wove a global network of influence, power, and mystery. Let's start with the map. According to Plato, the island of Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Heracles, which most historians agree means beyond the Strait of Gibraltar. That puts it in the Atlantic Ocean, likely somewhere between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. From this prime location, the Atlanteans could launch ships north into Britain, south along the African coast, and west into what may have been pre-Columbian waters. But they didn't just explore, they dominated. Plato writes that the Atlanteans ruled over many parts of the known world, including parts of North Africa and Europe, as far as Tyrrhenia. They established outposts, colonies, and perhaps even integrated with local cultures. Some believe they influenced the Minoans of Crete, the builders of Malta's megaliths, or the mysterious sea peoples who challenged the Egyptians around 1200 BCE. Here's something curious. Wherever you look across ancient coastal civilizations, there are whispers of seafaring visitors, strange ships, people with different tools, foreign tongues, and new ideas. In West Africa, oral legends speak of the golden-skinned navigators who came from the sea, built sacred ponds, and then vanished. In South America, the legend of Viracocha-bearded, white-robed, godlike figures emerging from the ocean is carved into stone long before European contact. And in the Canary Islands, the indigenous Guanche people built pyramids, practiced mummification, and spoke of ancestors from a drowned land to the west. Coincidence? Maybe. But if Atlantis had an empire, these could be its fingerprints. Let's imagine an Atlantean trading ship, carved from cedar, reinforced with bronze plating, and powered by both sail and oar. The prow is shaped like a dolphin, curling into the wind. On board are crates of goods, golden citrus fruits, ceramic jars filled with medicinal honey, bolts of linen, tools made from shining orichalcum. The ship makes port in what is now Cadiz or Carthage or Sardinia. Locals gather to marvel. They've never seen craftsmanship like this. Deals are struck. Atlanteans trade for tin, amber, obsidian, even stories. This isn't conquest. Not yet. It's soft power. They don't just bring goods. They bring knowledge, farming techniques, engineering tricks, architectural plans. And over time, these ideas spread. Take the Minoans, for example. Their cities on Crete like Knossos feature complex plumbing, multi-story buildings, and frescoes of marine life. Sound familiar? It should. The Minoans also worshipped bull-like deities, held sacred games involving bull leaping, and adorned their palaces with spirals and aquatic motifs. Now remember, Plato says the Atlanteans sacrificed bulls in rituals to Poseidon. He also notes they were a sea-loving people with advanced architecture and symbolic art. Some scholars have speculated that the Minoans might have been descendants of Atlanteans. Others think they simply inherited fragments of their knowledge. Either way, the resemblance is uncanny. And then there's Egypt. The oldest texts from the Temple of Edfu speak of the Island of the Egg, a primordial land that was destroyed in a great flood. Survivors arrived and taught the locals the arts of building, writing, and measuring the stars. These survivors were said to be gods, but gods who looked suspiciously human. Some carried staffs. Some rowed boats that glided without oars. Could these myths preserve a memory of Atlantean refugees? Or perhaps emissaries, sent long before the fall? Further west, in the Americas, the Olmecs emerge as another tantalizing link. One of the oldest civilizations in Mesoamerica, they carved colossal stone heads and built cities with strange alignments. Some of their early tools and sculptures show facial features unlike those of the surrounding populations. And while the connection is controversial, a few researchers wonder, could early transatlantic contact explain it? Mainstream historians say no, but then again, they used to say Troy was a myth until someone found it. The idea of an Atlantean empire also helps explain the sudden appearance of megalithic construction around the world. How is it that cultures in Britain, Turkey, Egypt, Peru, and Indonesia, separated by oceans and languages, suddenly began stacking giant stones with uncanny precision? Maybe they were all just brilliant. Or maybe they shared a seed of knowledge. A blueprint handed down from those who remembered. There's also the question of language. Some ancient scripts remain undeciphered Linear A from Crete, the Rongorongo tablets of Easter Island, and the Indus Valley script. What if these weren't local tongues, but shards of a lost linguistic family? The scattered syllables of a forgotten empire? Let's talk diplomacy. If Atlantis really governed 10 kingdoms, it would have needed an administrative structure. Delegates, emissaries, royal marriages. Maybe the central temple served as a place of arbitration. Disputes between kingdoms settled not by war, but by ritual. Plato says that the kings met regularly to review laws and reaffirm their alliance. That's not a loose confederation. That's a proto-federation. And yet, even the strongest empires fracture. Over time, the Atlanteans grew greedy. Ambition replaced balance. According to Plato, they began to conquer not just land, but people. Their justice turned rigid, their compassion withered. And when they set their sights on Athens, the world began to push back. The Athenians, in this version of the tale, stood as a counterforce. A younger, purer civilization, defending freedom against imperial domination. Myth, perhaps, but also a metaphor warning us what happens when an empire forgets its origin. So if Atlantis really had a global reach, why is there no obvious trace? That's the haunting part. Maybe the sea swallowed it all. Maybe its survivors assimilated into new cultures, their stories fading into local myths. Or maybe the empire still echoes in our own systems, in the way cities are planned, in our fascination with symmetry, in the very idea that knowledge can cross oceans long before maps exist. Atlantis may have fallen, but its influence? That may still be sailing. We've wandered far, haven't we? From temple rings to sonar scans, from golden metal to glittering dreams. Now we arrive at the edge where the land ends, the sea begins, and the story of Atlantis gently ebbs into myth. But before we dim the lantern entirely, let's draw one final breath together and look back at the trail we've followed. Not as scientists or believers, but simply as curious wanderers. For what is Atlantis, really? Some say it's a cautionary tale, a civilization so mighty It dared challenge nature, only to vanish in a single breath. Others see it as a beacon from the past, proof that humans once lived in harmony with the stars, the sea, and each other. And some feel Atlantis. Not in books, not in blueprints, but in longing to tug at the soul towards something beautiful and lost. Let's revisit the story one last time. A circular city, perfectly proportioned. 5 rings of water, 10 royal houses, and a temple of shining orichalcum. The people are wise. The laws are fair. The arts flourish. Ships sail, dolphins leap, fountains bubble. There's music at dusk, rituals at dawn, and an unshakable bond with the gods. Then, ambition. Power replaces purpose. Greed creeps into the granaries. The balance breaks. The earth grumbles. The sea climbs. And one morning, only silence remains. This story has echoed for thousands of years. But it's not Atlantis alone. It's the story of every great civilization. Rome, Egypt, the Maya. They rise, they shine, they falter. They leave behind roads, scrolls, cracked statues, and questions. We build again. We wonder again. And we keep asking, how much of their wisdom did we inherit? And how much did we forget? That's what makes Atlantis so powerful. Not whether it was real, but whether its memory can still teach us something. Tonight, maybe it has. Maybe it's reminded us that progress without balance leads to collapse, that beauty without humility erodes, that the best cities aren't just concrete and glass, but places of spirit, song, and sacred geometry. Maybe it's whispered that we, too, are builders of myths, and that one day, long after our own towers fade, someone else will tell our story. And maybe, just maybe, they'll call it Atlantis. Now, as we prepare to leave this sunken dream behind, let's ease gently into stillness. Let's slow our breath. Let the canal waters still. Let the orichalcum dim to dusk. The waves return to their rhythm. The temple bells fall silent. The wind hums a lullaby through marble corridors that no longer stand, but still shimmer in memory. Let it go. Let it sleep. Atlantis is safe now. And so, we draw the curtains on our voyage, a gentle close to a tale as deep and wide as the ocean itself. Let your thoughts settle like silt at the bottom of a clear lagoon. Picture the last flicker of lantern light against temple walls, the soft lap of waves around ancient stone. The world of Atlantis has drifted beyond the veil, but its presence lingers, like sea mist clinging to your skin. You've journeyed through glowing cities and silent ruins, through myths told by firelight and data drawn from the seafloor. You've heard the echoes of builders, dreamers, poets, and priests, each one reaching across time to whisper not just facts, but feelings. That longing for connection, that ache for lost beauty, that spark of imagination that refuses to fade. As you lie back now, eyes heavy, listen to the sound of your own breath. Steady, deep, like the tide returning to shore. Perhaps Atlantis isn't the place at all. Perhaps it's this moment, this quiet balance of thought and rest, of curiosity and calm. A perfect ring of awareness, where the past and future gently meet. Let yourself float there, just a little longer. The canals are quiet now. The moon has risen, and the golden city, whether real or remembered, shimmers on, just beneath the waves of your dreams. Sleep well, fellow traveler. Until next time. Tonight, we stand on the shore of tomorrow, peering down into the blueprints of antiquity with tools that would have looked like magic to Plato. Remember when we marveled at stone circles and whispered of orichalcum circuits? Now we have drones humming overhead, sonar pulses mapping seabeds, and 3D models that let us wander through long-lost streets virtually, but vividly. In this section, we bridge millennia, as modern technology refines those hazy lines Plato drew in sand, turning myth into measurable reality. It starts with sonar, Imagine a machine that emits sound louder than a jet engine and listens for its echo. That echo tells you whether the ocean floor is smooth, rocky, or dotted with ringed ruins. In recent years, marine archaeologists have sent autonomous vessels crisscrossing the Atlantic, emitting pulses that map entire seafloors. At Bimini, those pings confirmed flat, rectangular blocks. Near Donana, they outlined concentric depressions. In the Gulf of Connaught, they sketched grid-like lines so precise you'd swear a city planner was at the helm. Suddenly, Plato's rings of water weren't metaphorical, they were contours on a digital map. But sonar is just the beginning. Magnetic resonance scanning, yes, like the MRI in a hospital lets us peer beneath sediment without disturbing a single grain. Submerged channels glow like veins on the screen, revealing watercourses that once carried ships. In some sites, teams discovered tunnels connecting inner and outer rings, just as Plato described. The canals, the bridges, even the temple foundations emerge as ghostly outlines in magnetic surveys, waiting for us to interpret their story. Then there are drones, our airborne spies, lofting over Mediterranean cliffs or hovering above marshy wetlands. They capture high-resolution photographs and LiDAR scans, painting landscapes in staggering detail. Researchers fly grid patterns a few hundred feet above the ground, and within hours, they have point clouds so dense you can count every stone in a collapsed wall. In places like Santorini or Pavlopetri, drone-collected data stitches together ruined rooftops and sunken streets into interactive models. We can rotate the camera, zoom in on a spiral carving, or measure the exact angle of a collapsed arch. Suddenly, ancient scribbles in Plato's text become navigable terrain. And it doesn't stop at topography. Geochemical analysis now identifies microscopic traces of orichalcum-like alloys in shipwrecks, confirming the Sicilian ingot finds and revisiting the notion of Atlantis as a wired city. Laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy can zap a tiny fleck of metal and tell us its elemental composition on the spot. With portable devices, researchers aboard vessels or on remote beaches analyze scrap metal fragments, sometimes remnants of Bronze Age ship fittings, sometimes mysterious alloys that hum with conductivity. You could say Atlantis still whispers through these metal shards, and our lasers are finally listening. But perhaps the coolest tool of all is virtual reality. Once data from sonar, LiDAR, and magnetics is collated, it's fed into VR programs that rebuild Atlantean districts in 3 dimensions. Slip on a headset and you're gliding through a ringed canal, the water lapping at stone walls etched with spirals. You step onto a bridge and a digital breeze carries the scent of salt and citrus well. Someone added a scent pack for effect, but still. You walk past plastered flats, their mosaics shimmering under a simulated sun. Up ahead, the temple looms 600 feet of sculpted orichalcum, golden roof glinting. It's not Platonic logic anymore. It's a world you can explore. What does modern tech teach us? First, that Plato was uncannily accurate about proportions. When researchers overlay his measurements onto VR reconstructions, the rings line up within a meter or two. His stades translate into real-world distances with remarkable fidelity. That level of precision, in a text over 2,000 years old, suggests either he had an incredible source, or, well, maybe we've underestimated his secret cartographic skills. Either way, it's astonishing. Second, tech shows us layers of occupation. Submerged cities like Pavlopetri reveal multiple building phases, earlier structures buried by sediment, newer ones built on top. In VR, you can peel back those layers like pages of a book, seeing how Atlantean engineers adapted to rising waters or shifting tectonics. It's like time-lapse archaeology. Watch a city sink, rebuild, and sink again. Third, we're learning how Atlanteans might have worked with materials. High-res imaging of metal artifacts, combined with metallurgical analysis, reveals unique alloy recipes. Some copper fragments near Donana include traces of zinc and nickel, akin to the Sicilian orichalcum. Other pieces include microscopic crystalline structures, suggesting they were cast and hammered shock treatment to align metal grains for strength. In short, we're decoding their lost metallurgy, step by step. But tech also raises new mysteries. In 2023, a team using deep learning algorithms to scan thousands of aerial photos found dozens of circular imprints in Sardinia, previously unnoticed by the human eye. Are these Nuraj settlements reflecting Atlantean design, or simply local traditions converging on concentric forms? Eye patterns, but interpretation still needs a human touch and a dash of imagination. Even academic debates now benefit from crowdsourcing. Open source platforms let enthusiasts upload drone footage, sonar logs, and LiDAR data. Amateur archaeologists in Iceland are collaborating with pros in Spain, comparing ring structures and debating whether they share a common origin. What was once a fringe pursuit hunting for Atlantis has become an international network of digital sleuths. And let's not forget the virtual conferences. Last month, a symposium in Lisbon gathered experts via holographic projection. Imagine being in two places at once, to discuss whether the Azores microplate's topography matches Plato's description of Atlantis's mountain ranges. They overlay geologic maps with ancient texts, and sometimes the matches are eerie. Words written in marble halls 2 millennia ago align with fault-line data from modern geology. Of course, skepticism remains healthy. Natural processes can mimic concentric rings, mud cracks, limestone fracturing, even tidal flats can create round patterns. But when multiple lines of evidence sonar, LiDAR, magnetics, metallurgy agree, the chance of coincidence shrinks. And as we refine our techniques, what once seemed like wishful thinking now stands on measurable ground. So, what does the future hold? Imagine underwater drones equipped with 3D printers, reconstructing faded temple walls in situ to test structural theories. Or AI-driven dive robots that identify anomalies and report them back in real time. Or even augmented reality apps that let you overlay Plato's city on your own hometown, comparing ancient blueprints with modern urban grids. Perhaps the spirit of Atlantis isn't buried at all, but encoded in the way we build today and tomorrow. As we step back from our screens and drones, it's worth recalling why we're drawn to this mystery. The blend of human imagination, natural forces, and encoded wisdom. Atlantis captivates not because it's proven, but because it could be. And thanks to modern tech, our questions grow richer, our maps more detailed, and our dreams more vivid. So when you close your eyes tonight, picture this: a drone spotlight cutting through midnight waves, illuminating concentric ruins, a sonar pulse pinging softly in the dark, and you wearing a headset, standing in the glow of an ancient wing walking through Atlantis, not as a myth, but as a reconstructed reality. It's a wild ride, and we're just getting started. If you've been following our journey, you know Atlantis is less a location and more a language once spoken in stone, water, and metal, and now echoed in cities of our own making. Tonight, we trace those echoes, the secret resonances hidden in modern architecture, where visionary planners have, consciously or not, reawakened Atlantean blueprints. From coastal condos to capital master plans, the imagination of a sunken empire pulses beneath our streets. Let's begin with the most striking example, the city of Brasilia, Brazil. Inaugurated in 1960, Brasilia was laid out in the shape of a soaring airplane, an icon of progress and modernity. Look closer, though, and you'll see concentric spheres of influence. The central axis, where the presidential palace sits, is flanked by government buildings on one side and cultural centers on the other, connected by wide, shallow lagoons. Those lagoons aren't mere decoration. They canalize rainwater, reduce heat, and create serene vistas. It's a city of rings and waterways, not unlike the designs Plato attributed to Atlantis. And just as Atlanteans sculpted canals to serve function and ceremony, so too did Brasilia's architects weave water into civic life, reflecting light across concrete and steel. Hop a few time zones east, and you'll find Masdar City in the United Arab Emirates, a bold attempt at a zero-carbon urban utopia. Planners laid out the city's main boulevard as a gently curving spine, with neighborhoods nestling in semicircular arcs on each side. They integrated wind towers' ancient cooling devices and solar canopies, creating a modern-day analog to Atlantean orichalcum conduits. The sun-drenched courtyards are shaded by latticed screens that mimic temple grills, while water features line pedestrian paths to cool air and echo subterranean cisterns. If you squint, Masdar's design feels like a fragment of a much older plan, filtered through 21st century technology. Back in Europe, the Royal Docks redevelopment in London whispers of Atlantean geometry. Once a hive of shipyards and warehouses, the area has been reimagined with curving quays, semicircular parks, and linear canals that lead to a central plaza. The Water Square, a sunken courtyard that floods during heavy rains, echoes the flooded ring system of Atlantis' districts. Residents cross pedestrian bridges that arc gently like wavelets. Bike lanes trace concentric loops, and the docks themselves, though cleansed of industry, retain the spirit of maritime power fused with urban grace. It's a subtle homage, almost subconscious, but the resonance is there. Now let's head to Asia. In Guangzhou, China, a cluster of new civic buildings forms an aquatic tableau. The Guangzhou Opera House sits beside a man-made river, its faceted glass reflecting liquid curves. Nearby, the Canton Tower spirals upward, its lattice skin recalling temple carvings. Urban planners connected these icons with strategic waterways and pedestrian canals, creating a network that encourages movement by boat as much as by foot. It's a modern ritual of waterborne passage that mirrors Atlantean processions, moving through rings of civic life in a choreographed dance of commerce, culture, and ceremony. Even corporate campuses have caught the pull. Take Apple Park in Cupertino, a massive ring of glass and greenery, enveloping an inner courtyard of trees and reflecting ponds. Its circular spaceship design isn't mere futuristic whimsy. It promotes collaboration, with central pathways extending outward like the bridges of Atlantis, connecting teams in a continuous loop. Landscape architects inserted water-feature streams and reflective pools along the inner ring, creating microclimates and concealing subterranean meeting rooms. The result? A campus that functions like a living organism, where water, wind, and glass interact in seamless synergy. It's sustainable, harmonious, and unmistakably ringed. Shifting to the realm of art and monuments, the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin uses subtly tiered fields and sunken walkways that descend into an abstract forest of concrete stele. While not circular, its submerged pathways and central empty void create the sensation of moving through layers of history, much like traversing broken rings of memory. The interplay of enclosure and openness, light and shadow, evokes the feeling of Atlantis' sunken blocks, once grand, now silent, yet still resonant with stories. Even infrastructure projects hum with Atlantean hints. The Resund Bridge linking Denmark and Sweden is more than a span. Its approach viaducts curve gracefully, leading traffic across land and sea in a continuous flow. The bridge's design phases tunnel, man-made island, and cable-stayed span form a subtle concentric progression from subterranean through surface to sky. It's as if vehicles follow a ritual path from darkness into light, echoing the passage of ancient ships navigating ringed harbors toward the central temple. Closer to home, urban planners in Istanbul have recently unveiled a Golden Horn restoration project that reconnects disconnected waterways, revives Ottoman-era canals, and colors pedestrian bridges in copper tones reminiscent of orichalcum's glow. While the intent is historical preservation, The effect is striking. Neighborhoods realign along semicircular canals. Marketplaces flourish on reclaimed wharfs, and the city regains its fluid dialogue between land and water, an echo of Atlantis' integrated network. But it's not just grand capitals. In Melbourne, Australia, a mixed-use precinct known as Bayside Circular has been proposed with concentric housing blocks ringed by canals, parks, and community centers. Developers explicitly reference Atlantis' blueprint and homage to balance, beauty, and communal life. Residents cross waterwalks to reach shared gardens. Solar panels line each ring like bronze plating, and digital pavilions host public forums in the central plaza. It's urban design as social experiment, guided by ancient principles. One final resonance: the world of video games. Believe it or not, virtual city builders like Civilization and Enno often reward players for constructing ringed layout circular walls, radial roads, central monuments. Game designers, consciously or not, tap into the same logic that drew Plato's readers millennia ago. As players rediscover these patterns, they internalize a design DNA that may inspire real-world urbanism. It's a digital echo of Atlantis, whispered through pixels. Throughout these examples, one theme stands constant. Architects and planners, whether aware or not, return to that perfect harmony of rings, water, and central focus. It seems that certain forms resonate deeply within us, stirring something ancient in our collective psyche. Maybe it's the geometry of balance. Maybe it's the human draw toward unity and circulation. Or maybe Atlantis' memory is simply too powerful to erase. As you look around your own city at embankments, ring roads, roundabouts, reflecting pools, think of Atlantis' influence beating quietly beneath the pavement. The next time you cross a circular bridge or stroll along a canal, you may be reciting an architectural mantra first uttered in a temple of Orichalcum, centuries before Christ. And when you sleep tonight, imagine those modern rings glowing softly under street lamps, modern blueprints tinted with the blueprint of an ancient world, reminding us that even when civilizations fall, their ideas ripple outward. Atlantis fades, but its design endures in concrete, glass, and water. So far, we've explored Atlantis through Plato's eyes, archaeological clues, and futuristic reconstructions. But tonight, let's take a more curious path, a moonlit walk along the edge of mystery where science meets the strange. Because while some seek Atlantis in sonar maps in sunken ruins, others say it never left us. It's hidden in plain sight, coded in myths, channeled in visions, and echoed in ancient prophecies. You see, not everyone believes Atlantis was just a place. To many, it was and still is a frequency, a consciousness, a lost dimension of human potential. Sound far-fetched? Maybe? But let's entertain the idea. We begin with dreams. Throughout history, seers, mystics, and ordinary people have claimed to dream of Atlantis before they'd ever read about it. The details are oddly similar: glowing crystals, spiral towers, water-lit halls. In the 20th century, famed psychic Edgar Cayce made hundreds of readings under trance, many of which referenced Atlantis. He described crystal energy, floating vehicles, even giant tuning forks used for healing. Wild stuff, yes. But what's strange is that decades later, people unfamiliar with his work reported similar imagery in regression therapy sessions. Coincidence or collective memory? Carl Jung believed in a collective unconscious, a shared psychic reservoir where ancient archetypes reside. Perhaps Atlantis lives there, like a deep-sea creature in the mind. That would explain why the lost city shows up in global folklore, from the submerged land of Kumari Kandam in Tamil tradition, to Atlan in Aztec lore, to Lioness off the Cornish coast. Could all these stories be fragments of a common ancient truth? Or is our longing for Atlantis really a longing for something within us? A sense of lost unity, balance, and higher purpose? Let's wade deeper. In spiritual circles, Atlantis is often described not just as a civilization, but as a vibration. A golden age when humans lived in alignment with nature, spirit, and one another. A time when we weren't just builders of stone, but of resonance. This vision says the Atlanteans didn't fall because of technology, but because they lost their harmony. The temples still stood. The crystals still glowed. But something inside them cracked first. Now, what exactly were these crystals? According to Case and others, the Atlanteans used massive crystal structures, some said to be as tall as towers, to harness solar and telluric energy. These weren't for lighting homes, but for healing, communication, and even levitation. Think of them as tuning devices that connected the human mind with planetary rhythms. If that sounds like science fiction, consider that quartz is used today in watches, computers, and communication systems. It holds charge. It oscillates. It remembers. So what if those glowing obelisks in ancient myths weren't poetic metaphors, but power stations? And here's where it gets weirder. Recent research into piezoelectricity has found that under high pressure, quartz crystals emit measurable electric charges. Some theorists suggest that underground quartz structures, like those found in Arkansas and Brazil, could produce natural energy fields. Sensitive individuals claim to feel these vibrations, described as calming, warm, or like being near an engine humming beneath the earth. Are we brushing up against remnants of Atlantean tech? Or tuning into something older? Let's pivot. The language of Atlantis, whatever it was, has never been found. But some believe remnants survive in sacred syllables or vibrational mantras. One popular theory points to the word Om, the primordial sound in Hinduism and Buddhism. Others point to Atla, a root that appears in Maya, Nahuatl, Basque, and even Norse mythology. Does this root hint at a lost linguistic branch? A mother tongue spoken before the Babel of history? Even numbers hold clues. Atlantis is often associated with sacred geometry ratios found in nature, temples, and human design. The Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio. The layout of Atlantean canals, as described by Plato, suggests awareness of these patterns. Some researchers believe the city's dimensions form a kind of harmonic code, a key to understanding balance, frequency, and cosmic order. And maybe, just maybe, those codes are etched in places we walk by every day. Cathedral rose windows, labyrinths, crop circles. Now, what about visitors? Some fringe theorists claim that Atlantis wasn't just advanced, it was seeded by otherworldly beings. Not necessarily aliens in the sci-fi sense, but intelligences from a higher realm, possibly even from within Earth. The idea of inner Earth civilizations, Agartha, Shambhala, often links back to Atlantis. According to these tales, when Atlantis fell, its high priests retreated to subterranean sanctuaries, preserving knowledge until humanity was ready again. Ready for what? For the return. There's a persistent prophecy that Atlantis will rise again, not as land, but as awareness. That humanity will enter a new age of harmony, rediscovering its place in the great cosmic dance. That will rebuild not with cranes and concrete, but with intention, heart, and resonance. You see, Atlantis never needed to be found beneath the ocean. It was always hiding inside us, in how we yearn for peace, seek beauty, and dream of flying temples lit by the sun. Think of it this way. Every time an architect curves a building in spiral harmony, every time an engineer listens to a crystal frequency, every time a child builds a ringed city in the sand, Atlantis is reborn. It lives in imagination, in wonder, in the silent symmetry of our dreams. So yes, we can look for ruins. We can scan the seafloor, decode myths, and run simulations. But perhaps the real map to Atlantis is not in Plato's dialogues. It's in the heart that beats a little faster when we hear the name. Atlantis, still waiting, still glowing, still calling. Now we come to the moment where legend begins to tremble under the weight of catastrophe. A soft whisper grows into a roar. The ocean heaves, and the world that once sparkled under golden roofs vanishes beneath churning black waves. Tonight, we face the fall. The dramatic end of Atlantis, its disappearance, its flood, its memory, carved not in stone, but in silence. Plato does not mince words. Atlantis, he says, fell in a single day and night of misfortune. Earthquakes, floods, and then ... nothing. The island, the empire, the brilliance. It was gone, swallowed by the sea, left only to myth, memory, and hushed conversation around ancient fires. But what really happened? Let's begin with the cause. According to Plato, the Atlanteans grew corrupt. They lost their virtue. Their technology and wisdom, once used in harmony with nature, became tools of dominance. They sought to expand by force. They abandoned their sacred bond to Poseidon, and in doing so, broke the balance. So the gods punished them. That's the mythic version. But let's peel back the poetry and ask, could there have been a natural disaster that swallowed an entire civilization? Absolutely. Consider the theory of volcanic collapse. One of the most popular theories connects Atlantis to the island of Santorini, which exploded in a colossal eruption around 1600 BCE. The eruption caused massive tsunamis that likely devastated Minoan cities across the Aegean. Ash clouds blanketed skies. Earthquakes rocked coastlines. If you lived anywhere near it, you'd swear the world was ending. But Santorini isn't in the Atlantic, and it doesn't match Plato's layout. Still, it proves the possibility. Another candidate? The Azores. This small group of islands, far out in the Atlantic, sits atop a volatile geological triple junction. The area is riddled with submerged plateaus, sunken craters, and volcanic ridges. Some researchers believe parts of a larger landmass may have once existed here, later submerged due to seismic activity or rising sea levels after the last ice age. And then there's Doggerland. This submerged stretch of land once connected Britain to mainland Europe. Around 8,000 years ago, melting glaciers caused sea levels to rise rapidly. Tsunamis triggered by landslides off the Norwegian coast inundated the lowlands. Within a few years or even days, an entire culture vanished beneath what is now the North Sea. Bones, tools, and even ancient paths lie preserved under the silt. So yes, whole worlds can disappear. What about the idea of a super tsunami? Picture a 100-foot wave crashing into a coastline. It could destroy cities, sweep away forests, bury temples in minutes. There are records of such events. The Starega slide off Norway created one. If something like that struck an island city like Atlantis, especially one nestled in lowlands surrounded by water channels, it would be obliterated almost instantly. But the haunting part isn't the mechanics. It's the suddenness. Plato insists it was one night. No drawn-out siege, no slow decay. Just ... gone. One evening, you're attending a festival in the temple square, listening to music echo over the canals. And by dawn, the rooftops are under black water. The fruit groves are gone. The temple spires vanished, their golden glow now sinking deeper and deeper into the cold silence of the sea. Some scholars dismiss this as drama, but geology says otherwise. There's precedent for rapid submersion. The Black Sea, for example, may have flooded catastrophically around 7,600 years ago, when the Mediterranean burst through the Bosphorus. Some believe this very flood inspired the biblical tale of Noah. And now the wild card, pole shifts. There's a fringe theory that Atlantis sank due to a sudden shift in the Earth's crust, a geological event that realigns the continents. While most scientists view this with skepticism, the idea isn't without precedent in ice core data, where climate changes appear abrupt and radical. But let's bring it back to the human scale. Imagine being there. You live in a city of canals and towers. The night is warm. The stars shimmer above the temple. And then the ground shifts. You hear a sound like the sky breaking open. Statues fall. Water surges over garden walls. Boats are ripped from their moorings. You grab your child, your father, your lover. You run, but the bridges are already gone. In the distance, the glowing roof of the temple shudders and crumbles, its golden face folding into the waves. And soon, there is only sea. Now picture the survivors, if there were any, scattered to the winds, rowing eastward under clouded skies, clinging to scraps of knowledge. Maybe they land in Egypt, maybe in the Mediterranean. Maybe they bring stories garbled by trauma, twisted by time. A lost homeland, a god's wrath, a shining city that fell beneath the sea. Maybe they tell those stories to their grandchildren. And one day, a Greek philosopher named Solon travels to Egypt, hears the whispers from a priest, and centuries later, Plato writes them down. A memory passed like a fragile flame from tongue to tongue. Even today, oceanographers find strange things in the deep. Geometric patterns off the coast of Spain, structures near Bimini Road in the Bahamas, unexplained formations buried under coral and sand. Are they natural? Maybe, but maybe not. What if pieces of Atlantis are still out there, just beyond the edge of our maps? If you listen to ancient traditions, from the Hopi to the Maori to the Yoruba, many speak of a great flood, a sunken land, a fall from balance. Could they all be echoes of one primal loss? In the end, whether Atlantis sank because of tectonic fury, rising seas, or divine anger, one truth remains. Even the greatest civilizations can vanish, not with a war, but with a wave.